So we operate in Paris, and we thought that the Olympics would be a great year for us. I think I speak for all tour operators when I say it was one of the worst ever. It's just an absolute disaster. And initially it was a disaster because there were a lot of closures that we weren't expecting. There was a disruption and concern around fulfillment. But then ultimately what happened was that the people that came weren't the people who took tours. And they definitely weren't the people who took our kind of tours. Going into it, you have to know, is this the right customer for me?
Welcome to Arrival's Best Part of Travel podcast, where we take you inside the business of destination experiences. I'm Janelle Visser, and I'm here with Stephen Joyce.
Hi.
And today, we are talking about sports. Well, sort of. We're talking about what's coming up for travel experiences this summer, and one hot topic is certainly FIFA, and how tour operators plan for large-scale events coming to their destinations. We also talk about what's new at Walks and the evolving challenges of the competitive environment in Europe. So, to kick things off, Stephen.
Oh, I see what you did there with the kick things off. Yes.
You know, like football, kicking. Anyway, have you ever traveled for a sporting event?
Well, I'm not particularly sporty, but yes. In fact, we went to London. This was a couple of years ago. You and I went to Henley-on-Thames for the annual rowing regatta. And we watched all the university rowing teams compete in an all-day regatta on the Thames River while we hung out with the bougies and drank champagne and whatever they drink.
Yeah.
Lots of gin-based drinks.
I felt like the event was less about the rowing and more about
the drinking
that aspect of it. But I suppose that's
it was still a sporting. Actually,
there are a lot of sports where that's the case.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
So I guess it was a sport.
Yeah. Rowing is a sport, so it does count. So yes,
yes,
I have traveled specifically for a sporting event.
There you go.
Yes. How about you, Janelle? And you can't say that one because you've already used that one.
Obviously, I also traveled to that event, and it was very fun. It was a pretty unique experience, actually. And I think as one of the people in that group described it as, for anyone who knows Bridgerton, this is where all the Tawn comes out. And they walk along, they promenade along the river. And so it was a cultural experience as much as a sporting experience for me.
Yes. Yeah. There was a lot of peacocking going on at that event, for sure.
For me, what comes to mind, and specifically related to tour operations, is I actually led a tour. It was a special one-off tour down from Vancouver to Portland for a basketball game. And so I took a group of students down to see, they were international students, down to see their first basketball game. And it should have been a super smooth and easy trip if our bus didn't break down halfway through. But it did. And long story short, long story medium, I took it to a repair shop, told them the situation. We're trying to get to Portland. We were like halfway between Seattle and Portland. We need to get these kids to Portland. And they were like humming and hawing. And they're like, oh, it'll take a few hours. We might need to get some parts in. It might take a day. And then I was like, well, how long? Because these kids are trying to get to the basketball game. And the mechanic was like, oh, there's sports at stake? You should have led with that. And then they had us out of there in half an hour. So that was also a cultural experience. Sports are very important to some people.
Apparently, yes.
Yeah. So anyways, we're going to talk about sports here today, but not only sports. We had the opportunity to interview Roisin O'Sullivan, who's the managing director of Walks. And Walks has a lot of tours in a lot of locations and a good view on what's happening in the experiences sector, what's coming up this summer. And she shared a lot also about how they've got to where they are today, some of the adaptations they've had to make along the way. And it was a really fascinating conversation. So we'll get into that in a moment. But first, a message from our podcast sponsor.
Protect Group offers a service called Refund Protect. The way it works is that an operator or reseller offers Refund Protect at the time of checkout for an extra fee, usually around 10% of the ticket price. If the guest can't go because of some unforeseen circumstance, they request a refund through Refund Protect and they get 100% of their money back, including their fee. The best part is the operator keeps 100% of their revenue and they make a little extra. So To find out more, go to protect.group/bestpartoftravel.
All right. So before we jump into this conversation with Roisin, Stephen, you've known Walks for a while. You've known Roisin for a while. Can you give us a little bit of background on why this conversation is important to have right now?
Well, there's a lot going on in the world right now. And as Roisin talks about in her interview, Walks has gone through a lot of evolutions. Walks has always been a pillar in terms of an iconic brand within tours and activities. It's a very well-known brand. And so people look to Walks to see how the industry is evolving, because they tend to be quite progressive, and they adapt very quickly to changes. So to see them evolving and changing means that they are aware of things that are happening in the marketplace that maybe a lot of other companies aren't, like the canary in the coal mine, I guess, to some degree. And so it's important to see what they're doing, because if they're doing it now, probably in a few years, you'll start to see more and more other companies starting to do the same thing. So they've just been always very, very ahead of the times when it comes to things like tech and destinations of choice and things like that. So
yeah, definitely. And so as we're looking ahead to the summer and the rest of the year, it's really great to check in with an operator who has that kind of bird's eye view on a lot of things that are happening in the industry, and particularly in Europe, but even beyond that right now. So, and Roisin is, of course, a lovely person to talk to. So I was excited to get her on. And also we did want to specifically ask someone who could speak with some knowledge and experience about FIFA and more in general about what happens when large scale events come to town. So
yeah, for sure. And the other thing to keep in mind too is that because of the scale of Walks, they're not a lifestyle business. And we know from research that a good number of the operators and companies that exist within the tours and activity space are, I don't want to say lifestyle businesses, but they're smaller businesses. These are businesses that don't generate a ton of revenue, and revenue isn't necessarily even the most important part of why the business exists, right? But for Walks is very much a business. And so revenue is a very important part of what they do. And so that drives a lot of the decisions that they make. So for other companies kind of looking to see what are best practices in terms of business practices, Walks is a very good example of that, while still staying very true to their core essence of being an experiences business.
Yeah, and not to say that they don't have a why, because she does talk about that and how that has evolved and adapted as they have learned what their customers are looking for as well. Yeah, and how to provide those high quality experiences. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
All right, so Roisin, welcome to the podcast studio. We're happy to have you here.
Happy to be here.
Let's start with you before we get to business. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to where you're at? How did you get to where you are today and all of that? What's your story?
Sure. I have been in the tours and activities industry for 15 or 16 years now. I actually started working in the marketing department of another European tour operator straight off a backpacking trip into a travel publication, and then travel marketing through that business. Then I moved to Walks 14 years ago as the director of marketing. I stayed in that role for 4 or 5 years, and then took on chief operating officer for another 4 or 5 years, I think. And then when our founder exited, I took over as the managing director. In the mix somewhere, we were acquired by the Hornblower Group. We acquired Devour. So now I head up both Walks and Devour.
That's amazing. And so what brings you the most joy in your role?
Oh my God.
We like to get into the real talk here. I should remind you about that.
I honestly, watching the team grow, having been there for such a long time, I've had the honor of seeing a lot of our team members grow with the business. So team members who came in as customer service agents in Texas, relocating across to Europe, and not just building careers as managers and in some cases later senior managers and directors, but also build families in that time. So I think having that opportunity to see people to develop and be part of their story and see how well they can adapt to the ever evolving needs of the business. It's been such an evolution to be in the space for such a long time, to go from just chasing any early growth to trying to figure out what is profitability, how do we manage inventory, like all of the different things that come up with a maturing business, to watch the team respond to that and develop their skill set and have the business evolve with them has been fantastic. And in the case of Walks, it's an almost exclusively female team. So to watch that with a lot of young female professionals and to see so many women come into leadership has been, a great honor, the honor of my career, I'd say.
Wow, that's really interesting. Women in leadership, especially in travel tech, notoriously underrepresented. And so the fact that you said it's mostly or primarily a woman-led team, I find really inspiring.
How did that happen? How did that come to be? And how can other companies do something similar?
I think it was organic. I think if you look at, particularly in Italy, if you look at any of the tour operators, not necessarily at senior leadership level, but at the operating level, the coordinators and the office administrative staff, customer service teams, like the early hires, I think you'll find that they're almost always women. I think what was different about Walks was that the team evolved, right? That as we grew, we didn't hire externally, we brought people up. I think the default position of tour operators is to be women, because women are more likely to be in these hospitality service type roles, particularly highly flexible roles for us as well. As we've rebuilt after COVID, and we're now remote, and we offer a certain level of flexibility. The majority of good applicants that we get are female because the work suits women. So I think it's the default position. I think if you see businesses that aren't primarily led in this space, that there's probably something else at work there, because it should be fairly natural when your entry level roles are mostly women. Stephen and Jason, also our founders, are like very female forward. I think if you were to ask Stephen that same question, he would just tell you that the women were always better. So progression opportunities, I think, faith and kind of a natural flow.
And like you said, it's hiring in at those entry level positions and then giving opportunities for growth within the organization, as opposed to looking to outside to fill those spaces. So
senior roles,
growing and nurturing that team, which is so important and I think that's the takeaway for other organizations, is even though there may be, just with the way that hiring is and the way that expertise is now with the status quo, probably fewer women at existing leadership positions that you could bring in externally. Having women in entry-level positions and growing them from within the organization means that you build your leadership team, and then you can fill those roles.
And I think you can't underestimate the importance of like industry and institutional knowledge in these businesses. As you start to reach for those bigger goals and get into the tens of $millions of revenue and try to compete on direct sales and stuff, it can be really tempting to look at multinationals. Like, in Ireland, we would have Google, to look at people in those businesses and say that they will know better. But my experience has been that's just not the case, that knowing the industry, the competitive set, knowing the product is a far better base than having experience in an unrelated industry. And there aren't that many related industries. Even if you're coming from hotels, there's just not a lot of like transferability outside of the industry. So I think it's a faster route to having capable staff to grow them versus bringing in people from the outside who feel like they know more or better. You have to unpick that experience then and teach them the industry and have them apply it.
And relationships.
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
When you've got that institutional knowledge and you've been in the industry for a long time, you build those relationships and you know who everybody is, right?
Yeah.
You get somebody who comes in from, I don't know, e-commerce or airlines or some unrelated vertical. They don't know anybody in this vertical. And so even though they may know the fundamentals and you can teach them the fundamentals, you can't teach them relationships. That's they have to build.
Yeah. And which just reduces their learnings too, right? It's just how fast can you learn? And I think fastest learnings come from industry foundation for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And speaking of learnings, what I feel like Walks is somewhat of a leader in the experiences space, and other smaller companies might look to you for inspiration or for learning. What are some of the things you've learned along the way as you've led this organization and as you've weathered the challenges and opportunities in the experiences sector?
Probably don't count your chickens before they hatch. I think 1 year's growth can be another year's bust, particularly if you're working with OTAs. Right now, it's very all or nothing in terms of if you're top of the rankings, you're getting more sales than you can possibly match supply with. But as soon as you lose it, then the tap is off and it can be really hard to respond with your supply. So, not overhiring based on an expectation of growth, I think is really important. Again, if you have a team that you're nurturing and you're bringing people up with you versus going to market, as I see a lot of growing operators now bringing in a bunch of new directors, this whole new infrastructure. We have been through that in the past and hit the big bus that was COVID, and you just ended up over your head on costs. So I think being aware that winning cycles end and you can be in a really good place on a product and you can lose a lot of traction, you can lose supply, you can lose sales. So just being constantly aware of how the market's moving around you, staying on top of your costs is super, super important. And then I think reading the market, because you can have values that you hold tight that maybe ultimately don't necessarily connect with your client. I think every tour operator starts with a really crystal clear vision of who they want to be that can be based specifically around a certain group size or a certain product type. And then things can change. Things do change. I think we've seen consumer preferences change massively over the last few years.
Yeah.
And if you're not aware of that, if you're not talking to your consumers and reading your reviews, you can lose track of when it's not serving you anymore and end up making poor product decisions too. So you have to be very responsive and adaptable in this industry. And I think you always have to be looking for new information. I'm trying to just constantly recalculate, like, where am I, what's working, what's not working, through your customer's perspective, not necessarily your own.
I love that you mentioned that idea of reading the market and not counting your chickens before they hatch, because something that's an issue right now, or not an issue, a potential opportunity or a potential challenge in North America right now is FIFA. I've spoken to a number of operators. Some are excited, some have a little bit of trepidation. Some of them are planning for larger demand. Some of them aren't seeing that play out. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, because you have a lot of different destinations in your portfolio, have you noticed in the past for big events like FIFA, the Olympics, even Taylor Swift coming to town, have you noticed an impact on the business, and how do you plan for that?
Yeah, we operate in Paris, and we thought that the Olympics would be a great year for us. I think I speak for all tour operators when I say it was one of the worst ever. It's just an absolute disaster. And initially it was a disaster because there were a lot of closures that we weren't expecting. There was a disruption and concern around fulfillment. But then ultimately what happened was that the people that came weren't the people who took tours, and they definitely weren't the people who took our kind of tours. And I think that's something that we miss a lot, that we think all visitors want to take tours, but they don't. It is a niche thing to do. It's still a niche thing to do. Most people who travel aren't taking a guided tour. Around these big events as well, I think there can be a lot of apprehension from visitors in that they know these major attractions are going to be oversubscribed. And so what we found in France was that they ultimately ended up being undersubscribed. The restaurants were all complaining that no one was eating there. Business was dramatically down for most tourism businesses during the Olympics because people were avoiding the center, expecting that everyone else would be there. So
Right.
I think you going into it, you have to know, is this the right customer for me? And that's different. At the Olympics, it's such a huge event, and probably FIFA much the same, that it ruled out most visitors. I think the average Taylor Swift concert is maybe different because a lot of, for example, Americans will come to Europe using it as an excuse to get a city break in. So there might be a good opportunity to sell food tours to millennials traveling to a Taylor Swift concert because they're doing the city break. But are people who are coming for this event considering this to be a city break where they're going to have cultural experiences, or is the fact that it's in a city an overwhelming thing for them and they're actually going to keep their distance because they're concerned about that? So I think the and a good way to read that is like, what does the media say? Is it saying, this is how you manage the crowds in LA? This is what's the sentiment around interacting with that destination? The one thing that was interesting for us in Paris, though, was we had a really good year in Bordeaux because, like people coming to Paris and doing a city break, some people were coming to Paris and doing other parts of the city and behaving more like tourists, of the country even, and behaving more like tourists when they got there. So I think the secondary cities maybe benefited a little more. That was something that we saw in our non-Paris markets.
So people were like, I want to go to France, but let's avoid Paris because of the Olympics. So they went to other destinations in the region.
Yes, they were like, I'm going to go to Paris for the Olympics. It would be crazy to go to the Eiffel Tower because there's probably 20 million people in line. But they weren't applying that same thinking when they got to other places.
And so did you develop any products specifically for the Olympics, like Olympic themed, whatever, walking tour or anything like that?
No, we discussed it, but we didn't. I think the reality of those visitors is that you are talking about a low price point, non-ticketed tour. Those aren't profitable for us because the guides that we work with are quite expensive. We work with licensed guides, their early rate's quite high. And people with distribution, there's just not a lot of money in just walking tours. You wouldn't believe that. We're called Walks. We don't really do that many walking tours. It hasn't been a great area for us. So we didn't. I will say, I think that there's an opportunity for certain businesses. I think that there's an easy upsell on products like that, but it's probably platform specific. I think Airbnb experiences probably a good opportunity to upsell customers on stuff there. Maybe Booking.com seem to be pulling their socks up in this area too. So there might be an upsell opportunity to someone who wasn't looking for a tour. So I think we initially misunderstood what the demand was going to be. In retrospect, that would have been a better approach for us. And I would think going into FIFA for people who are in those markets, we're not in those markets. But if you can adapt your product to be more relevant and on platforms where you might get an upsell, that's probably the best opportunity.
I have a question for you. So you mentioned that the customers weren't the right fit for your tours, that what you were seeing is that these were price sensitive travelers that were looking for cheaper hop on, hop off type things that weren't necessarily doing the more expensive tours. But these are not inexpensive experiences, right? I mean, to go to the Olympics is expensive. Yeah. To go to FIFA is expensive. So the people that are going to these destinations for these events have money. Is the issue that they prioritize their money differently in this case? They're spending all their money on the Olympics, so they have nothing left for anything else? Is that sort of the thought behind that?
Yeah, I think the average traveler, broadly speaking, isn't a tour taker. And I think the amount of money that you're willing to spend on a tour represents the value that you place in a tour. And so there's a lot of that in it. I think things like hop on, hop off or walking tours can be very appealing to people who don't put a lot of value in tours because they're not expensive. So the math is different. I think you have to have a lot of value. You have to put a lot of value in time with a guide to spend €200 on a Vatican tour, for example, versus €50. And that would have been 15 years ago. That would have been a lot of the thinking when we were doing sightseeing tours was you were really selling skip the line access. And the guide was also there, and they were priced accordingly. But as the industry has developed and the consumer has developed, that's not even close to what we're selling anymore. Like the skip the line access is kind of beside the point, not always even necessary. It's very much about the value of time with the guide. So I would think, and I could be totally wrong in that, but my sense of our consumers and how we make these decisions internally is just much more about the profile of that person and what they value.
I thought it was interesting that you mentioned earlier, sometimes companies start out with this clear vision of what they want to be, and then they have to adapt based on the market. And then you said that we don't have very many walking tours at Walks. Is that related? Is that a pivot that you had to make at some point? Did you start with walking tours?
We did. We had a lot more. We always said we were primarily Vatican and Colosseum tours at the start. Our first product was at the Vatican, but we certainly did a lot more walking tours in the past. Our historic walking tour of Rome. But in the time I've been here, that's been our walking tour of Rome. It's called Welcome to Rome. Is a product that we reworked most years. I think we put it to bed last year after, on its 10th iteration or something. So yeah, we have really moved away from that over time.
And so what's what is your key focus now? Or maybe a better question is, what is your key focus going forward? What are you seeing? What are the emerging categories, the growing categories that you're developing products for?
Private tours have been really big for us, and I think we see it's a huge part of our future. And we've been really surprised by the consumer there, because we would have thought, again and again, I think it's, you got to stay on top of what your customers are interested in. But we would have thought that we were building tours for couples who wanted to upgrade to have the time to themselves. But actually, what we're seeing is people opting for a private tour where there's cost efficiency. So 4 or 5, 6 people, they might as well book a private tour because they're already paying a lot for it, which is interesting and different. It's a different kind of consumer. So we're thinking a lot about that. How do we do more custom tour, private tours in the future? We also have launched our first overnights, which are going to be, I think, a slower ramp up because we have to build a market for it. So we were doing Pompeii Amalfi from Rome as a day trip. Over time, the quality of that just really deteriorated because the restrictions on how long drivers could be on the road, and the traffic got really bad. So you went from having 3 or 4 hours in Pompeii to it being a 90-minute tour to 2 hours. The traffic down in Positano got really bad. And so it became a situation where we felt if you wanted to go to the Amalfi Coast, you really needed an overnight. You wanted to be in Positano after the crowds left. And so as we got into product development, we found that even though the price point is much higher, we felt more confident about the value proposition on a higher price product where we were really delivering on a memorable service. The same we're doing like Tuscany from Rome. A lot of the stuff that we would have thought about doing as day trips in the past just aren't viable as day trips. It is just not possible to cram this stuff into the same period of time as it used to be. So for us, multi-day right now is more development of a day trip that we think actually delivers on what that person wants. There are a ton of questions in there because how does that work with their hotels? Do they take it first or last? What about the luggage? Can people actually plan around this? I think there's some research out there. You guys have published research about how the tour is being booked earlier and earlier on. So, I mean, if that is true, then we can get in front of them, and we're kind of banking on that this research is being done earlier and people can work into the trip, but it's very different for us. We're really excited about it. We're going to be rolling it out in a lot of our markets. And it just brings opportunities to do things that we've been trying and failing to deliver on as day trips for a few years. For the team as well, it's really great because they are creating value in a way that is really hard in this mass market space to deliver a product that they test and say, this is amazing. And I would have every single one of my family members do this. And I'm super proud of what I do. So I think we feel very connected to that. Does the market feel connected to it? I think that's going to take a little bit longer. We have some work to do there. Excited about it.
That's awesome. That's exciting. And yeah, we have seen a lot of people curious about multi-day, single-day tour operators curious about getting into multi-day. And what does that entail? Obviously, accommodations and a few other things are involved there. But yeah, definitely growth in the space. So it's interesting that you guys are getting into it as well.
And it's interesting that you've made this jump into, or the shift, I guess it depends on how big the jump is, into multi-day because of the fact that you've seen that the quality that you want to provide the consumer is simply not there because of things like traffic and infrastructure issues and things like that. So you need the extra time in order to deliver the kind of experience that you want. And so you're almost being forced into creating these multi-day experiences because it's the only way you can really deliver it to those types of experiences to a consumer. So you mentioned that you're doing overnights. Are you already thinking about like 3, 4, 5-day type experiences as well that encompass more of that?
Yeah, we would love to. I think what we see is like a middle ground that might be, I think the customers are different, right? The person who's booking a multi-day today, I guess for such a long time, that has been such a very different consumer to someone who's buying a high-end guided tour. So what we're trying to do is...
Is it though? Do we know that? Do we have that research yet?
Well, I know from talking to Travis Pittman that the average cost is about $200 a day. We're charging $200 for 3 hours. So I would think that with no accommodation. So I would think that the price point makes it quite different. I only know anecdotally. I've also spoken with some of the multi-day operators, and I think it is a much younger demographic in some cases, or it's specialist or niche. Definitely in our markets, you're probably looking at younger people, right?
For the multi-day, you mean?
Yeah. My
Yeah.
sense of it is that it is, but that there is opportunity. Like for us, it is, as you mentioned, like it is a response. It is a response to over-tourism. It is a response to what it now takes to do things properly, to like actually see something. It just takes longer. There is more friction in travel. There is more friction in guided tours. There's more friction in attractions. Everything's just harder now because the numbers are so much more vast.
Yeah.
So we would love to, but we would really love to bring our customers with us. I don't think we're not that interested into trying to appeal to what we believe to be a very different market. We'd like to evolve more so than pivot.
Well, and it makes sense what you said about you don't want to be on a bus for 4 or 5 hours, be in a destination for 2 or 3 hours, the busiest 2 or 3 hours of the day, and then leave and get on the bus again when you could spend the night there after most of the other tourists leave. That seems like a huge jump in guest experience quality. Yeah.
Yeah,
For
absolutely.
sure.
Yeah. And it's the difference of being able to sit down and have a slow lunch and a couple of glasses of wine, which is why people are in Italy in the first place. You can forget that when you're planning, but those are the moments that really deliver. I think that's why our staff really love it, is we're not taking people to Positano and giving them 60 minutes to walk around. We're taking them there for dinner. We're having dinner on the coast with a gorgeous view. It's just so much more connected to the things that we experienced in our early product development than we've been able to deliver on for a while based on just increased visitor numbers.
I think the other nice thing about this is that, and I'm going to talk about AI for a minute because everybody's talking about AI, right? I think the nice thing about this is that what you're doing is you're saying, we're the experts. We know this place. We know this destination really well. Instead of using some AI thing to figure out an itinerary for you that is going to end up with you being on a road for 4 hours and then hopping out of the bus, taking an Instagram photo of a place, hopping back on a bus and driving for another 4 hours, is you're saying, for a similar price point per day, we're going to provide you with much better value, and you're going to get to enjoy all of these things without having to put as much thought and get stressed out about it as much, right? Like you're taking all of that stress and anxiety out of the planning and the actual travel part, and you get to just be a passenger. You get to just be the recipient of all of that on the trip, as opposed to having to do all the heavy thinking, right? I think a lot of people, when they go on vacation, they have this dream of, oh, I'm going to go have that nice little slow dinner and a couple of glasses of wine, and the bulk of their trip ends up them slogging luggage around from hotel to hotel or getting onto buses that they aren't even sure that's the right one because they're trying to do it all themselves. And I think the benefit of what you offer is that curated experience, but now in a multi-day way, as opposed to just a one-day thing, which I think is amazing.
I think it's a different use case as well from where multi-day is now, right? Because it's for us, this is within a trip, right? It's not the whole trip. You're still going to have to do a lot of independent traveling, but we're right now looking at a Cinque Terre from Rome. And we did it 2018. We did Cinque Terre. It met at Termini Station at 5:30 a.m. So a lot of people missed that. That was the first train out. Right. It was 3 trains to get there. 5 hours, but often delayed. The team had this lovely idea of giving the guests eye masks to wear because they would need them because they would be asleep for such a long period of time on the train. And then we'd get there and we'd have 3 or 4 hours and then we'd be right back. So it was 10 hours of travel and 4 or 5 hours there, a lot of which is logistics and meals, really. It's so like hotcakes. And the customers loved it. And we could not convince any of the guides to do it. They were like, this is horrible. No one should experience it. And yet the demand was there. People want to cram a lot into their trips. I think they're putting more and more emphasis on seeing the world, on the importance of experiences, which means I think they're trying to maximize the time that they have more and more. So to be able to bridge what customers want with an experience that we feel comfortable living up to the standards of the brand is really exciting. But yeah, we just have so much to learn about at what point in the booking in booking planning, do we need to start reaching people with this information? I think there is good flexibility around hotels now. You can cancel, you can change reservations up to such a late period with Airbnbs as well, that it feels like the opportunity exists, but it is a bigger commitment and it is not standard for people to make that decision.
So Stephen brought up AI, so I have to ask, what is your approach to AI at Walks, and how do you handle that tension between needing to be up with the latest tech developments, but also maintaining this human experience element?
We have a lot of internal work on it. I think, like any team of people, there are people on our team that use it incredibly well, particularly in our marketing department. It's been really great in marketing. If anyone's ever tried to write 50 versions of content for all of our all the different sales channels, they will know exactly how frustrating that can be and how little value a human adds to that. So we find it really helpful with scaling content. Training models has been incredibly time consuming though. So I'm not sure we've gained a lot of time efficiency on it. We are creating a new website at the moment that we will launch later in the year. And so it's been really helpful there, where we have a lot of new products. So we find some really obvious places to plug it in marketing. I think in operations, it's been a little bit more individual dependent. I know the team use it for communications a lot. Our team are largely not native English speakers. So I've also seen that be really helpful for people who aren't very comfortable in written English for their communications. I think that's a fantastic use of it, and for internal presentations. There's been some talk internally about, can we use it to automate tasks that are quite reconfirming vendors or different things. What I'm quite focused on though is like, where do we create actual financial value with this? There's a lot of these like things that look like efficiency, but actually take a huge amount more time to create the tools. They're very expensive. They will continue to become more expensive because they consume so much data. And the other thing is that everything changes so much. We have tools to just import tickets to our system, and we have to stay on top of them constantly because the formats are always changing and how the attractions work are always changing. And so as soon as you have a workflow developed, it changes. And having to constantly evolve technical tools to meet our constantly evolving operational situation, I have found over time to not be the best use of time. It's often faster to just have the team plugged in. So, I think there's a huge amount of enthusiasm in the team. There's a lot of tinkering. We have had some people have some great success with it. But for me, as the person responsible for the bills at the end of the day, the important question is, and how does that turn into money for us? If we're creating an efficiency, what else are we going to do with that time that's more valuable? And what's the ongoing cost of this going to be if we start to create elaborate automations in a situation that's just constantly in flux?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Looking forward to the summer and beyond, what's your outlook? What are you thinking about? Should we be worried? What are you excited about?
I mean, I think we should all be worried about the oil crisis, but just like quietly. There's no point in over focusing on it because
quietly worried. Okay. That kind of describes my life actually.
Just underlying just this baseline anxiety for everyone. We're all just anxious sitting around.
Yeah. Compartmentalized anxiety, I think, is the safest approach.
Compartmentalized anxiety. I love that.
Yeah. Always worried. Why would you not be worried? We can't work in travel and not worry constantly. No, I think the year's shaping up well for us. I think travel seems to be in a relatively stable position. It seems to me anyway. There's demand is definitely there. The demand for Europe is absolutely there. Things are changing so much within the industry, though, in terms of the level of competition that's there. Working with the OTAs is becoming more and more challenging. As the competition ramps up, it becomes harder and harder to maintain what you have there, particularly for mature businesses. So I think the next few years are going to be challenging from a competition standpoint. This year, I think a lot of businesses experienced it last year. This year, even more businesses will experience it. Whatever gains we have from last year, we will be protecting. Everyone will. So I think, we're just, like I said, just constantly trying to read and adapt and learn. But the industry seems great. The demand seems to be there. And with a lot of attractions, it seems that things have settled down post-COVID. There was a lot of flux before in different ticket purchasing procedures and how that was all working. I think The noise to me seems to be settling down in Europe in most places, which is good. We're starting to find a new kind of equilibrium with the attractions, I hope. Although they too are struggling to deal with increased competition. There's a lot of strain. But yeah, it seems to me that the majority of challenges that exist for larger tour operators anyway, and medium-sized tour operators, are going to be in competition rather than in demand, and therefore in supply. Can you get enough tickets? Can you keep enough guides on payroll? That kind of thing.
Are you seeing any particular inbound markets that are surprising to you, or perhaps not surprising given what's happening in the world right now? Are you seeing the US market increase, for example, like more Americans coming to Europe, or more Canadians coming to Europe, as opposed to if they were planning on going to the US, they might be choosing to go to Europe instead? Are you seeing differences in inbound markets that way?
I don't think we're the best operator to ask that, because we're 70 to 80% US anyway. So we very much track the US market. I think because of the price point and the brand, I think our word of mouth has been very much on that side of the Atlantic. And so we're seeing much the same. What we are seeing is good opportunities in private tours within, the Middle East and Asia. And so that's a lot of where we're looking for the future, as we try to do a little bit more of that private high-end trip within a trip stuff. That all seems to line up really well with what we know of those emerging markets. But we haven't seen any real shift in demographics for year to date.
So very similar to what it was last year. And then looking at one of the big issues last year with Europe was overheating of Europe, both literally and figuratively, right? So are you seeing any kinds of shifts in terms of where travelers are going within Europe? Are they going to, for example, Scandinavia last year had a really strong year in terms of increased tourism numbers because of the coolcation factor. I know it's a terrible word, but it kind of describes that sort of shift from very hot or warm areas within Europe in the summer to cooler climates like Scandinavia. Are you seeing any of that happen this year in your booking data?
Spain, I think, is definitely higher demand than it was in the past. I think particularly Madrid, San Sebastian, less so Barcelona, but I think those what previously would have been secondary destinations in Spain, we're seeing really high demand for. And Devour is pretty well established there. So I think we have a good read of the market when we see increased demand. The thing about Scandinavia, like a lot of the heat was seasonal, so we would have seen July be very soft and August, whereas in the past, only August was soft and July was good. So for us, actually more of a concern is what are July and August going to look like this year? Does that lapse? Because that is heat related. Are people just not going to go to Europe for 2 months in the middle? That makes the season really short, right? That means we're just looking at May, June, September, October. But it's almost an unworkably short season if we lose these hotter months entirely. So we have an eye on that. I think we don't have a good read just yet because we're not into the booking window, but we'd be much more worried about the hotter cities than the visitor numbers in the cooler months.
And so coming back to your multi-day approach, does your multi-day approach help to lessen the impact of the July, August, because you can offer those multi-day to a different client set outside of that traditional traveler that would be traveling in those summer months?
Let's hope so. I think right now where we are with the overnights being focused on more of a day trip client, I think you're still talking about a traveler who's trying to cram a lot into a schedule, which means you're probably still talking about a high season traveler. Like the behavior of shoulder season and people taking advantage of those other periods tend to be more self-service, let's say. So I think with the product line as it is right now, we're still very much focused on our existing client base, which will have the same restrictions. But I think there's a lot of great opportunity in that. And I think maybe more importantly, there's really good messaging in it. Don't go to Rome in August. You can start there, but we have all these other great alternatives. And we'd love for those alternatives to not be the obvious destinations. And as we can start to drive more demand, we will be doing that. We'd really love to do Puglia. Everyone feels great about Puglia, but how do you get anyone there in a reasonable amount of time? So I think the opportunity is there. Right now, our product line is still teed up to be very much the same traveler.
So it could be a different conversation next year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you mentioned competition, and I know that it's a big issue in Europe right now. And I'm wondering, obviously, I know you don't want to share any of your trade secrets, but how do you stand out in this really highly competitive environment? How do you differentiate yourself on both direct channels and OTA channels? Because I know the OTA, standing out on OTAs can be a big issue as well.
Yeah, it's nearly impossible. It's particularly impossible as supply gets more and more restrictive. We would have in the past differentiated based on specific entry times, for example. But with increased competition, it becomes very hard to secure just that one entry time if you have a tour that's dependent on, for example, first opening or last closing, those timings. So that's become a lot harder. And for us, I think the answer is dependability and quality. If you have the lion's share, if you have a high number of reviews and those reviews are really positive, that speaks volumes. We're seeing demand hasn't changed that much. Like, it's really still for the core attractions, right? And we're seeing a lot of demand for shorter tours for sure. But it is not the case that this year's travelers are less likely to want to do the Vatican and the Colosseum when they go to Rome. And trying to innovate different ways around seeing the Vatican and the Colosseum is a lot less productive than making sure that you have the best guides and the most dependable delivery and that your reviews are great. So we hope that the quality will speak for itself and that how long we've been in operation will speak for itself. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge and definitely harder to do on a product level than it used to be.
High quality, good reviews.
Boring answer.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Well, I think we should wrap up, but I want to bring it back to where we started. It's you. And as you think about your journey as a leader, leading Walks, your journey through Walks to your position now, and for other leaders who are out there in the space, maybe emerging leaders in tourism activities, maybe emerging women leaders, what advice would you offer to them or to your past self?
I think, honestly, I think curiosity is the thing that serves you best. I ended up in operations because I was working in marketing and it just seemed interesting, the problems that they had and how did they solve them. I think being curious about the problems that everyone around you has and the industry has and that your product line has, that your client has, it takes you in good directions and it brings you to learning and development in a way that you just can't get otherwise. I think I have not planned my career in any way. I have made zero career decisions. It's just kind of tumbled from one thing to the next thing in a job offer here and just on the basis of being interested and curious and wanting to solve problems. So I think, yeah, honestly, it's worked for me. I think if you can properly understand and engage with the business broadly across different disciplines, and there are so many different disciplines, it's not just a marketing organization. Most tour operators are doing marketing, they're doing distribution relationships, they're doing operation. More and more of them are doing technology. There's finance. There's so many things to be done in a business like this. You really need a broad understanding of all of those things if you're going to get into leadership. And the best way to learn that is going to be from different peers and other operators, just to be curious about how do all of these different pieces fit together? What are the problems we have? What are the most important ones? Like, what should the priorities be? That's, yeah, best way to learn.
Amazing. Thank you. I love that. Curiosity. And we're very curious people on the podcast here. So
That's it. Lines up.
Yeah. And as the old saying goes, a rolling stone collects no moss. So as long as you keep moving, you're always progressing, always
Sage Stephen, for your wisdom.
It's
if
one
you
of our
need an
core values.
old-timey anecdote, that's why I'm here.
Old-timey anecdotes and dad jokes. He's your
Yeah,
guy.
that's me. Yeah.
Are you the rolling sage that's gathering the rolling stone that's gathering no moss right now, though, Stephen?
He is right now.
I'm rolling on my knee scooter right now. That's about
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Literally rolling.
No moss here.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Roisin, for your time. We're super happy to have you here on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. It's been fun. I really enjoyed talking to you guys.
So, Janelle, what did you think? Great interview from Roisin.
Yeah, it was a great interview. And I wasn't expecting this, but right off the bat, we launched into talking about leadership and women in leadership. And I often like to ask those questions, but the questions usually end up towards the end of the interview. But she jumped right into it and sharing about how their leadership team is primarily women leaders and how that's the case because they grew those leaders from within the company. And I
Mhm.
thought that was a really interesting perspective because we've talked a lot about women in leadership and travel and how, particularly at the higher levels of senior leadership, it's challenging to find that balance. And her take was part of that is because companies are bringing in higher level senior leaders from other industries or from other companies. They tend to be male, but because they have a lot of women, and we know this about tourism and hospitality, is it's predominantly women at the lower levels on the ground, but how do they get to the top? And so I loved her take on how they really intentionally focus on growing people from within the company, from the ground levels up to the leadership positions.
Yeah. And that's very much a result of how the company has grown, right?
Yeah.
So it started as a small business and grew. And as they grew, they hired more women from the operational side because, as Roisin said, the women are just really good at the operations side of things. And if you look at a lot of businesses, women do run the operations side. But because of the nature of the way that the company has grown, those people have grown with the company. And so they have taken on more responsibility and had the opportunity to continue to elevate within the company. So I
Yeah.
think part of the reason why they've been successful at having female leadership is because they've really nurtured and fostered that culture from within the organization moving up. And so I think that's why it's so important. And we've talked about this in the past, that you need to create those opportunities for people within your organization, not just women, but all people within an organization, to be able to succeed and grow within an organization and give them opportunities to elevate within an organization. Because otherwise you just end up with the same old at the top.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate how she mentions it wasn't just that they were intentionally trying to have women in leadership positions. It was that they were trying to grow and give opportunities to the people who had stayed with the company, who knew the
Mm-hmm.
company and who knew the industry. And it just so happened that the best people for the job were predominantly women growing
Yeah.
up through the company. And that challenge of finding people who really know the industry, because experiences is different than other sectors of even travel and certainly other industries. So it's hard to have that institutional knowledge when you're coming in from somewhere else and you're not accustomed to how things work in the experiences sector. So
Yeah.
I appreciated how she pointed that out as well.
Yeah. And that's true for pretty much every vertical and every industry, is that if you have people that are experienced within the space, it just makes sense to keep them in that space because that's where their expertise exists. And
Yeah.
bringing in someone from Amazon or wherever to run your business may seem like a great idea because they're not operational people, but they have to learn the industry. They have to make the relationships and all that sort of stuff. And we know that a lot of what drives this industry is relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you? What stood out to you from this?
I thought it was really interesting when she talked about Walk's sort of evolution into the overnight tours.
Yeah.
Was interesting because we've seen multi-day. We just talked about multi-day. We've talked about multi-day tours on several episodes now, and multi-day tours is a thing. It's all. I mean, it's always been a thing, but it's really kind of coming to the fore now because of more digital access to multi-day tours and more distribution and things like that. And it's just interesting to see a company like Walks, which is traditionally known as a day tours company, evolving into something different, but still trying to focus on the same client base. I'm not sure if that's going to necessarily work, but we know from talking to other multi-day operators, successful operators in the multi-day space, that the client base is a little bit different, but it's a great space to be in. And there are certainly some interesting opportunities for them if they can stand up to those challenges.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciated her approach to reading the market and seeing where your clients want to go. Not just in terms of destination that they want to go to, but what types of experiences are your clients looking
Mm-hmm.
for? And so she was mentioning that getting into overnight tours wasn't necessarily about attracting a new type of client, but it was about serving their current clients in the best way that they can. And because of over tourism and because of how much overcrowding is happening in Europe, it just takes longer to get to places, and the experience in one day is just not up to par. So then it needs to be an overnight trip. So being driven by the experience and how to offer the best guest experience rather than just like trying to open up to a new sector of tourism. I thought that like customer focused, guest experience focused approach was really good. That kind of ties back to the sports thing as well too, right? It's like large scale sporting events. Who are you creating experiences for if you're trying to create experiences for those events? Is it your current clients? Is it new clients who are coming into town for the events? And all of the questions that surround that. It's a pretty complex topic.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting when Roisin said that when large scale events come to town, that they didn't see an increase. They in fact saw a decrease in business because those folks that were coming were choosing not to do some of the tours because they were worried they were going to be overcrowded. And also they were more interested in doing like cheaper, shorter type tours rather than the more immersive catered experiences like the ones that Walks does. And that got me thinking about one of the big economic drivers for these big events, as far as what governments say when they try to attract these things or try to convince locals that these events are good for the economy, is that it drives more business. But in fact, if what Roisin is saying pans out, these people that are coming are really not dissimilar from, say, cruise ship customers, right? That come off a boat, they spend a minimum amount of money in the destination, and then they go away again. And if that's the case, there's a very strong argument that these types of large scale events are actually not great for destinations. And that's an interesting discussion for another episode.
Well,
probably.
And there's a whole rabbit hole can go down about the impact on local communities and on social issues in local communities and all of that Vancouver is grappling with right now. And I'm sure a lot of other destinations are grappling with is, does that benefit trickle down or not? Or does it make it worse for the people at the bottom? So, yeah,
exactly.
But it's an important question to ask. And especially for tour companies who we spoke last episode about the importance of leaving the benefits with the local communities. When we talked to Shannon about adventure travel, we talked about how adventure travel companies tend to be very good at supporting local communities because part of the adventure is connecting with the culture and connecting with the local people. And so there is a really community focused aspect to those types of tours. So when you're talking large scale events as a tour operator caught in the middle of all of that, how do you maintain that balance of serving these customers who are coming into your destination, but also having an overall positive benefit on the local communities that you operate in and that you interact with along the way?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's tricky. But I think that was the biggest sort of twist for me in that I was expecting a different answer. And for her to say that was like, okay, well, it's actually different.
It is. No, and I've heard anecdotally from several operators, I've heard that kind of like they expected big things the year of the Olympics. And then it actually didn't pan out the way they thought. But the next year, because that destination is now in everyone's minds because they're hearing about it, and Olympics or FIFA is here and they see it on TV or wherever they're watching. If they're watching some of the program, then it's at the forefront of their mind for the next year when they plan their trip, not during a large scale event. So there is some opportunity there for some bleed over afterwards.
Right. Like the billboard effect.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I really liked the way she closed off talking about leading with curiosity. I really love that perspective of like, how do you figure out, and just personally in your career, how do you figure out where you're going next? But also as a company, how do you figure out where you're going next? And this approach of what piques your curiosity and what do you think is interesting and what do you want to try? It really resonated with me that she said she didn't plan her career path at all. Because, you look up to someone like this who's in this high ranking position for a globally recognized company that people look up to, and hearing them say that they didn't plan to get there, I find encouraging.
Yeah. I mean, do any of us really plan to get anywhere? I think it's true that a lot of us happen to end up where we are because of circumstance and opportunity and the people that we know. And then you just end up where you are. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not great. But for the most part, I think it's hard to plan for things like that. you can sort of have an idea of what you want to do, but
But there are
life
people
has a
who
way
go in.
of.
There are people who go in with a plan. They go in with an ambition
Yeah,
and they
I
follow
know.
it. And sometimes they
I
get there
know.
and they're like, "Oh, this isn't really what I wanted." Oh,
Yeah,
so
exactly. And also
so
sometimes those people are insufferable. So
but what I'm trying to say is it's always encouraging to meet someone who has succeeded at getting to this respectable position and hearing they're just like us. They are just figuring it out along the way. They're just following their curiosity, and
yeah,
here they are. And
it's the journey, not the
it's the
destination,
journey.
right?
And you can tell that she's in the right place and she's
Yeah,
passionate about what she does and she's really engaged. And yeah, just a generally great human to have on the podcast. So
yeah. And she's
yeah.
enjoying her journey, and we
Yeah,
are enjoying it with her.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings us to the end of another exciting episode of The Best Part of Travel. If you enjoyed that episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues. Come visit us at Arival.Travel to learn more about our events coming up and our expansive library of research. And we will see you next time on another episode of The Best Part of Travel. Thanks, Janelle.
Thanks, Stephen.